Okay, what's up guys? This is J-Man Time, and today I have another rare weapon for you guys today. Now, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of the FNP90. The FNP90 is a Belgian PDW or personal defense weapon designed by the Belgian arms company FN, or FN Herschel as it's sometimes referred to as. But I'm pretty sure none of you guys, or maybe some of you guys have, but most of you guys probably haven't heard of the Hill submachine gun. The Hill submachine gun, also known as the Hill H15 model 1952-53 or model 1960 in some sources, is a prototype bullpup helical magazine-fed submachine gun designed between the years 1952 and 1960. This weapon was designed by an American arms designer by the name of John L. Hill, who lived from about 1905 until 1991. Now, this was one of the, or if not the first submachine gun to use the specific helical feed system that we now see in the Belgian FN P90. This weapon was designed again in 1952 originally, but there's at least 4 to 6 different prototypes with 4 to 6 different barrel lengths and about 2 or 3 different calibers. Now, the caliber of these prototypes vary. Some prototypes were chambered in the 9 by 19 millimeter parabellum. Others were chambered in the .30 or .380 ACP or 38 ACP. And there was at least one that was chambered in the .45 ACP, which was a popular pistol cartridge in the 1950s in the U.S. Army and had been since World War I with the introduction of the Colt Model 1911 handgun and the American Thompson submachine gun, especially the M1A1 Tommy gun of the Second World War era. After World War II, the U.S. Army was looking for another submachine gun replacement, and at the time that Hill designed his H15 submachine gun, the Korean War was just coming to an end. In 1952, it was right in the middle of the war, but by the time the first prototype came out, it was 1953, and the war was basically almost over. Hill presented his weapon to the U.S. Army sometime between 1953 and 1955, but the U.S. military didn't want his prototype as the Korean War had basically come to not an official end, but a ceasefire that pretty much allowed U.S. troops to withdraw partially from Korea, but the U.S. didn't need any more weapons as they pretty much had a large supply of Tommy guns and other weapons already stored in Korea and in Asia as a whole. So Hill tried to sell his prototype to other firearms companies over the years, and one of those companies was the Belgian FN company. The Belgian FN company actually met with Hill in 1963 or 1965 at a firearms plant in Pennsylvania, according to the information that I'm reading from. One of his prototypes had to be given to one of these guys, as it states in 1963, a prototype submachine gun was left for the FN company. Now, it is unknown, I'm assuming it is, but most likely the Belgian FN company later reverse engineered Hill's prototype into the FN P90 submachine gun. Keep in mind, the first prototypes for the P90 did not come out until about late 1979 to 1981. And these pre-production prototypes, none of them were mass produced, but by 1991-1993, the Belgian FN company had finally came up with a workable prototype, as we now know as the P90. Hill died in 1991, so if this weapon, the P90, is a copy of his submachine gun, then that means that the Belgian FN company would not have to pay any royalties for Hill's feed system. The same feed system he used in his H15 is basically almost the same system seen in the Belgian FN P90. That is just a theory based on all the historical information that I have come across over the time that I spent researching this weapon. So if that is true, then the FNP-90 is basically just a upgraded clone of the Hill H15 submachine gun from 1952-1960. Now, John L. Hill only designed a few prototype weapons in his lifetime that are known of. I'm pretty sure he probably had other prototypes at his residence, but most of those prototypes are probably lost to history. But John L. Hill is never really mentioned in American firearms history, and that was one of the reasons I made this video. When most people questioned where did the FNP-90's designed, or at least its feed system, come from, now you know. This system that the P-90 uses was basically just a copy of an American prototype submachine gun from the 1950s and 60s, but its designer, John L. Hill, has never been credited for designing that specific feed system. I haven't seen any submachine guns or machine guns that used this feed system in the years before Hill's prototype weapon was unveiled in 1953. So I'm just going to assume at the time of this video that his submachine gun was the first submachine gun to use that Pacific turned action magazine fed system, feed system that you see in the Belgian FNP-90 and in the original Hill model 1953/1960 submachine gun. So what do you all think of this prototype weapon? I think it was one of the, I guess, more revolutionary American prototype submachine guns of the era. It was definitely lightweight. I mean, this thing was smaller than an Israeli Uzi. I mean, I've seen photographs comparing one of the prototypes with the Uzi submachine gun. So it was definitely light and compact, and for a bull pump weapon, it had a pretty sleek looking design for a weapon designed in the 1950s. And if I had to pick, you know, I like the Tommy gun and the M3 grease gun, which were still being used in 1953. And if I had to pick, you know, this weapon wouldn't be a bad weapon. I mean, it's a close quarters weapon, so let's be realistic. The Tommy gun and the M3 grease gun probably had a slightly longer range. I don't know. The range probably doesn't matter. I mean, this is pistol ammunition. But since most of the Hill submachine guns were chambered in 9mm and .38 ACP, I would say the Tommy gun and the M3 are more powerful. But if I wanted a light compact weapon that's not much larger than a handgun, then I guess the Hill submachine gun would be a viable option in 1953-1960. Keep in mind, the U.S. Army would keep using, not just the U.S. Army, but the U.S. Army and the Marines would continue to use submachine guns until the introduction of carbine assault rifles like the H15 during the Vietnam War. So at least another 10 to 3 or 4 years by the time Hill's prototype came out in 1953, 1960. The U.S. got involved in the Vietnam War in 1963 in terms of having troops on the ground, and by 1965, the first generation of carbine assault rifles had begun being issued to U.S. troops and Marines stationed in Vietnam. So 1965 is pretty much the time period where submachine guns had become, I guess, obsolete to the U.S. military. And by 1971, most submachine guns had been pretty much obsolete or considered obsolete and had been taken out of service by that time. For example, the American Thompson submachine gun was taken out of service in 1971. The M3 grease gun would go on to serve much longer. It wasn't taken out of service officially until about 1991, 1994. But either way, the submachine gun, in terms of its military usage, was basically coming to an end, and that was probably one of the reasons why the U.S. military didn't adopt the Hill submachine gun when it was introduced originally in 1953 and again in 1960 with the later prototypes. So what do you all think of this weapon? I think it's a cool prototype, and most people don't know about it. I think it did influence the FNP-90, or the P-90 is probably just a reverse engineered copy of this gun. But what do you all think? Tell me in the comment section below, and until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.